It appears we both have a grievance with Apocalypse.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So those of you who have been following my channel recently will know that in my last video, I reviewed the original X-Men Legends game from 2004. Just to quickly recap, that game is a personal favourite of mine, and it's a game that induces a lot of nostalgia in me. It's actually my favourite X-Men game if truth be told. Today we're going to be looking at the sequel, and the final X-Men Legends game, X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse. Released in 2005, so just 1 year after the last game, once again developed by Raven Software. Once again, this is going to be for the Xbox version. So for those of you who don't know, the first game basically consisted of a story involving Magneto wanting to essentially take over the world and establish mutant supremacy. The game ended with Apocalypse declaring war on the X-Men, setting up the sequel nicely. This game takes place shortly after the events of the first game. In the beginning of the game, you get a pretty badass cutscene where Magneto breaks into a high-tech prison.
Go. Amuse yourselves.
You find out during this cutscene that Magneto and the X-Men have formed a temporary alliance.
Nice trick. What do you do for an encore?
Which way?
And have teamed up to rescue Charles Xavier from the prison. Once Xavier is rescued, you get a short tutorial where you have to fight your way through the prison and escape. This introduces you to the overall gameplay mechanics, as well as the game's combat. The game is practically identical to the first game in terms of the overall controls, combat and gameplay mechanics, so there is an air of familiarity about it. This is a good thing in my personal opinion, because it means you can pick it up and learn the controls very quickly if you already played the first one. Thankfully they basically kept what worked about the first game, and expanded upon it, rather than make any unnecessary drastic changes. You can strike enemies the same way, with pretty much the same attack combinations. Once again you have a separation between light and heavy attacks, and can also grapple and throw enemies. Just like in the first game, each character will have an assortment of superpowers to unlock and upgrade throughout the game. You can activate each character's superpowers by holding down the right trigger and selecting the power you want to use. One of the changes they added this time is that you can actually allocate each power to a particular button yourself, and there is so much more variation and customization here, and I really like it. It just helps to really add to the replay value. The leveling up system is very similar to the first game, but with a few new features added, and it's a bit more varied here. And again has more customization options. There are various different powers and abilities to unlock this time, and you can choose between them. You once again gain experience points by defeating enemies and completing objectives. These points can be used to increase your character's attributes such as attack damage, max energy, defense and speed. And you also have skill points that can be added to increase the effectiveness of a certain power or passive ability. Again, there is so much customization here and it really adds to the game's replay value. Once the tutorial mission is over and you escape from the prison, that's when the game really begins. You find out a bit more about the game's overall story and you get some context as to why the X-Men and the Brotherhood are now working together.
After helping to rescue me, Magneto requested the X-Men's aid in freeing Genosha. I could hardly refuse. Apocalypse is far too strong for either team to battle alone.
It turns out that in addition to kidnapping Xavier, Apocalypse has also kidnapped several other mutants, some connected to the X-Men, others affiliated with Magneto and the Brotherhood, including Magneto's son Quicksilver. In addition to this, Apocalypse has decided to invade the island of Genosha, which is an island located somewhere in the Indian Ocean, and is being used as a safe haven for mutants by Magneto, and a place for him to establish his mutant army. Apocalypse of course saw this island as a threat and decided to wage war on it. This led to Magneto going to the X-Men for help and forming an alliance. It's an interesting story for sure, with plenty of twists and turns along the way. And a big overall theme of the game is enemies putting aside their differences and learning to work together for the greater good.
We're one big, happy, dysfunctional family.
So basically teamwork, similar to the first game. Due to the fact that the X-Men and the Brotherhood are now working together, you get a whole bunch of playable characters this time. Most of them being from the X-Men and some of them being Brotherhood members. For example, you have some of the same playable characters from the first game, but not all of them. You can play as Cyclops, Wolverine, Iceman, Jean Grey, Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, Rogue and Gambit, all returning from the last game. Sadly though, they removed the ability to play as Beast and Emma Frost, who are in this game but not playable, as well as Psylocke and Jubilee, who are nowhere to be seen in the game. And what on earth happened to Magma? She was basically the protagonist of the last game, and she was quite an interesting character and is nowhere to be seen here. She's mentioned in the game a few times, but sadly never makes an appearance. I'm not sure why she was removed, but I digress. You can also play as some new X-Men members, Bishop and Sunfire. In addition to the playable X-Men characters, you can also play as some of the members of the Brotherhood. These characters are Magneto, who of course is the leader of the Brotherhood, Scarlet Witch, Toad, and my personal favourite, Juggernaut.
You better mind your manners.
I'm guessing your mutant power is the ability to absorb pain, 'cause no one talks to me like that.
Seriously, I pretty much had Juggernaut on my team at all times, because I found him to be the most practical and the most effective in combat. He is insanely powerful in this game. Seriously, Juggernaut in this game is a badass. But I digress. Sadly though, there are only 4 members of the Brotherhood you can play as, and I'm not sure why they didn't add more, because there are several other members of the Brotherhood who make appearances throughout the game, and even help you in combat at times. For example, you fight alongside the likes of Mystique, Sabretooth, Pyro, Blob, and several other characters, none of which are playable. Interestingly, I actually used to own the PC version of this game, and in that version exclusively you could play as both Pyro and Sabretooth. Although to be perfectly honest about it, Pyro in that version of the game was basically a reskinned version of Sunfire, and Sabretooth was basically a reskinned version of Wolverine, but I digress. In addition to all these playable characters, you have 3 secret unlockable characters you can play as later in the game. These include Iron Man, Professor Charles Xavier, and even Deadpool. More on those later. So yeah, there are plenty of playable characters to choose from, and all of them look and feel very different from one another. Just like in the first game, each playable character has their own unique powers and abilities, as well as their own unique attributes, strengths and weaknesses. For example, certain characters such as Magneto, Iceman and Jean Grey can make bridges at predetermined locations of the game. This helps you reach various collectibles. In addition to this, several characters in the game such as Magneto, Sunfire, Jean Grey, Rogue, Storm and Iron Man can fly. This can be very useful for reaching certain areas and collectibles that would otherwise be unreachable. Flying can be very useful for simply traversing levels quicker. It helps to at least have one flying character on your team. Certain characters such as Juggernaut, Colossus and Rogue have super strength. This can be used to pick up heavy objects that the other characters can't, and these objects can be thrown at times. There are also several obstructions in the environment that can be moved using these characters, and again this can help to create shortcuts and even obtain certain collectibles. Certain characters have elemental powers such as Iceman, who can once again use his freezing ability to put out fires. This can be very useful at certain points in the game. Certain characters such as Rogue have the ability to drain energy, and this can be used in various puzzle solving sections of the game. Nightcrawler and Deadpool both have the ability to teleport, and this can be very useful for reaching certain areas and collectibles. You can even teleport a teammate with you. Characters such as Jean Grey and Professor Xavier have psychic abilities. There are so many different abilities and attributes between each character, and all of this does its bit to add to the replay value. Some characters even have their own unique ability. For example, Wolverine and Deadpool have a healing factor, and can regenerate health over time. This can give you a huge advantage in combat. Just like in the first game, certain characters are more effective in combat against certain different types of enemies, and this makes the game's combat so much more refined. For example, certain enemies have resistances to certain kinds of attacks. Some enemies will be more resistant to energy, some will be more resistant to physical damage, and some will be resistant to psychic attacks. Characters who are more effective in melee combat, such as Wolverine or Juggernaut, will be so much more effective against enemies who are energy resistant. Likewise, characters such as Cyclops and Gambit will be more effective against physical resistant enemies. This gives you an incentive to mix up your team and have as many different attributes and powers as you can. Speaking of enemies, you once again get a huge amount of enemy variety in the game. For example, most of the enemies in the game are minions of Apocalypse, and they mostly consist of twisted, mutated abominations that are produced as a result of genetic experiments and cloning at the hands of Apocalypse's right-hand man, the degenerate mad scientist Mr. Sinister.
I love to tinker with nature. Take, for instance, that marvelous teleportation ability of yours. If I were to meld that with the optic ability of Cyclops, who knows what manner of creature might arise?
I do not want to hear your sick schemes.
Who kind of plays a role as Apocalypse's main servant, but with an agenda of his own. You take on a race of mutated, cloned insects called Circe. These abominations have been bred by Mr. Sinister to infest the world and wipe out all of Apocalypse's enemies. You fight various different versions of these throughout the game, and as you play through the game they get more and more twisted. You also take on Infinites, who are mutant clones, once again bred by Mr. Sinister. These act as Apocalypse's army, and there are many different versions of them throughout the game. You also take on Sentinels, misguided worshippers of Apocalypse, the Morlocks, and so many different types of enemies throughout the game. Just like in the first game, you also have the extreme powers that can be unlocked for each character.
Cold snap!
Nicely done. The more you fight me, the more of me there is to...
Each character has their own unique, extreme powers, and once again, these look really badass and are really cool in combat.
Don't bother getting up.
And can bail you out in some of the more tough fights. You also get a huge amount of level and location variety. For example, you have levels that take place on Genosha, where you have to repel Apocalypse's invasion, and even save the Genosian prisoners from Mr. Sinister's testing facility. You have levels in the Savage Land, which are more jungle themed. You have levels in Apocalypse's nuclear power core and his cloning facility. Just like in the first game, you have a bunch of levels that take place in the sewers, where you have to take on the Morlocks, who are sewer dwellers who have a grudge against all surface dwellers. You also once again have levels that take place in New York City. You can also visit Apocalypse's tower, which is his base of operations in New York. You even get to visit Egypt in the finale of the game, which is of course where Apocalypse is originally from, and you have to finish him off there. So many different levels, each with their own unique visual style and aesthetic, as well as their own atmosphere. Just like in the first game, as you play through each level, you can find and obtain portable health potions, as well as energy potions, and can even find new gear for your team. Just like in the first game, the game is basically split into two modes. You have the regular levels where you take control of a team of 4 and traverse the levels, defeating enemies and completing objectives. And you also have slower, more RPG heavy levels where you chill out in a base of operations and talk to various characters.
Sure, he's gruff on the outside, but deep down, he's got a good heart.
I'm the brother of Scott Summers. You might know him as Cyclops.
Oi, if it ain't one of my favorite new X-Men teammates. How you doing there?
Again, just like in the first game, there is so much dialogue here.
And I commented that Scarlet Witch was intelligent and good-looking. Shortly after that, rumors started to fly, and next thing I know, Magneto is talking to me like I was a potential son-in-law.
You said she was cute? Well, of course everyone thought you and her were hitting it off.
The game is split up into acts. Each act has its own set of levels, as well as a camp that has been set up for you to use as a base of operations. It's fun to explore these camps in between missions and speak to various characters. You get to learn about certain characters' backstories and some of their views and opinions on things.
Well, ain't this just a cozy getaway? You imagine right. This place gives me the creeps like nothing else in this world.
You also get plenty of dialogue where characters will comment on the events of the game. This really helps you to indulge yourself in the game's story, and I really appreciate it. You also get some pretty funny lines of dialogue here and there.
What are you laughing about? Ha ha, very funny, Cupcake.
Speaking of dialogue, during the levels there will be several characters as well as enemies that will talk to you, and at various points of the game, depending on who you have on your team, there will actually sometimes be some unique dialogue that can be discovered directed at a particular character.
Hey, what are you doing here, Gambit? You're an X-Man.
Well, you know me, Pyro. I'm always turning up just where you don't expect me.
Greetings, Nightcrawler. It is indeed a pleasure to see you.
Mr. Sinister, what in heaven's name are you doing here?
This is a lot of fun because once again it adds to the replay value. Another pretty cool feature you have at these camps is that just like in the first game, before each mission, you get a mission briefing. These usually consist of Professor Xavier and Magneto getting the team together and briefing them on their next objective.
If you ask me, you're all a bunch of uptight snobs.
Y'all better watch your tongue, Toad.
These are way better than the ones in the first game because here they actually have so much more drama, due to the X-Men and the Brotherhood working together.
It was buried months ago during an earthquake.
Right you are, Wanda. You got it all. Beauty and intelligence. A man will be bloody lucky to have the affections of a woman like you, he would.
Please, show some self-respect.
What?
These mission briefings usually descend into both sides arguing with each other.
I bet you'll find out being bad is kinda good.
You've just crossed a big line, Juggernaut.
And these interactions are pretty funny.
So you got a black sheep in the family too, huh, comrade? Well, don't feel so bad. My stepbrother's an embarrassment to me.
Quiet, Juggernaut. Can't you see Colossus is in pain?
Thank you, Wanda. You are very kind.
Hey, what about my pain, Wanda? I feel very bad for poor old Colossus.
Juggernaut in particular gets some of the best lines of dialogue here.
Hey, Bobby, why don't you just shut your yap?
Huh. Big and dumb. Ooh, what an unusual combination.
So you must be looking to die, huh?
Yeah, like that's gonna happen at the hands of some bulked up steroid freak like you.
Do not trouble yourself, comrade. Allow me to deal with this Cossack.
You're certainly welcome to try, comrade. Heck, Snowboy here's even welcome to join in.
Seriously, Juggernaut beefs with just about every member of the X-Men in this game, and most of his dialogue involves him almost starting a fight with them.
I had no idea you were such a pansy, Wolverine. But I guess that's why you talk so much and fight so little.
That does it. You're dead meat. But once this truce is over, you and me are gonna have a little chat, Juggernaut.
Anytime you want, short stuff.
This is actually really funny, and it does its bit to make these mission briefings so much more memorable. What's interesting is you can actually skip these briefings altogether and just do the mission instead. But then of course you would miss out on all of the excellent dialogue. The game has several pretty epic boss battles. There are actually quite a lot of them in this game. Each act basically has a bunch of regular bosses, and they each end with a main boss. These usually involve you having to fight one of Apocalypse's 4 horsemen. Since the X-Men and the Brotherhood are working together in this game, many of the more well-known X-Men villains are not enemies in this game. Instead you take on many of the more obscure villains from the X-Men comics. For example, you take on Grizzly, Zealot, Lady Deathstrike, Garruk, Sugarman, Bastion, the Stepford Cuckoos, Strife, the Living Monolith, and several others. You even get a boss battle against Deadpool at one point, who can of course be later unlocked as a playable character. And his dialogue is really funny.
Me? Yeah, I'm fine. I just have an uncontrollable urge to rip you into tiny shreds and then dance and spit all over your graves. I don't know, really. The only thing I find threatening about you is your fashion sense. But I'm really good at killing. You might say it's my specialty. That and ballroom dancing. But just guess which one I can actually make a living at. Nope, sorry, can't do it. I really want you all dead. And not the kind of dead where there's a possibility that you might still be alive. I want you so dead that you'll be reincarnated as a corpse. I did work as a video game programmer for a few months. Does that count? Finally, it's beating you up time! I really gotta get a new catchphrase.
Like I said before, in addition to these regular bosses, you also take on the 4 Horsemen of Apocalypse. These consist of Abyss, Mikhail Rasputin, who is the brother of Colossus, Holocaust, and even Archangel. These boss battles are a bit more challenging and epic than the others. You also take on Mr. Sinister at one point, and you even get an epic final boss battle against Apocalypse himself. This is awesome. I really enjoyed the boss battles, and I'd say most of them are on par with the boss battles in the first game, for the most part. In addition to all this, the game has several interesting features and collectibles to find and unlock. Just like the first game, you have the danger room that can be accessed from each camp by finding the danger room computer. Just like in the first game, you can unlock each danger room challenge individually by finding the danger room discs associated with it, scattered around the levels. There are many of these in the game, and some of them are quite well hidden. Some of them can even be purchased, just like in the first game. Once again, you have team challenges, as well as individual challenges for each character, and these are a lot of fun to do. Some of them are quite challenging too. As you improve your danger room grade, more challenging danger room missions will be unlocked. You can also once again gain experience points and level up your characters in the danger room, just like in regular play. And each individual character's challenge can unlock some unique gear for them. In addition to these regular danger room challenges, you can also access the danger room from the main menu, and just like in the first game, you can set up your own skirmish battles by doing this, and even play as some of the game's villains, as well as some of the bosses and regular generic enemies. This is really fun to do. I mentioned before that there are 3 unlockable characters to play as. These do take a while to unlock, but they're not too difficult. First of all, to unlock Iron Man. Each act of the game will have 4 homing beacons scattered around the levels. These are not too difficult to find as long as you explore the levels and keep your eyes open, but they can be missed. Once you find a full set of homing beacons, you will unlock a portal in your camp which will allow you to access a secret bonus level. Each of these secret bonus levels will contain a bunch of enemies, as well as a piece of Iron Man's armor. The final bonus level will actually contain Tony Stark himself. Once you find Tony Stark and bring him his armor, Iron Man will be unlocked as a playable character, and he is pretty powerful with a whole bunch of pretty cool powers and attributes. You can unlock Charles Xavier, who was also playable in the first game, but only in specific levels. In this game you unlock Charles by completing every single danger room challenge. As I mentioned before, you will need to find a whole bunch of danger room discs to unlock these challenges, and once you have successfully completed them all, Charles Xavier will be unlocked as a playable character, and he's pretty powerful too. And finally you can unlock Deadpool. Deadpool can be unlocked by simply completing the game's main story and defeating Apocalypse. These unlockable characters all have their own unique abilities and attributes, and this of course adds some replay value to the game. In addition to these features, you also have several other collectibles to find. You once again have the concept art that can be found scattered around the game. Again, some of these are quite well hidden. Once you find these, you can view them in your camp, and these all look pretty cool. You can also once again find comic books. You can view these in your camp. In addition to these, you can also view the game's loading screens, as well as the cutscenes and cinematics. You also have these items called data discs hidden around the game. Just like with the homing beacons, there will be a set of 4 of these that you can find in each act. And by finding a full set, you can increase the amount of health packs and energy packs that you can carry at a time. This can be really useful, particularly at later stages of the game. You also once again have a trivia game. In the first game there was only 1 of these. In this game, however, each camp has its own specific trivia game where you can really test your knowledge of X-Men lore. Some of the questions involve the events of the game and the characters, some of them are more comic related. Some of them are even about the events of the first game. Again, just like in the first game, this really shows that the writers and developers had a real passion for the source material. Man, do you guys remember the days when video games were actually made by fans of the series they were based on? Yeah man, those were the days, but I digress. You also have several new costumes for each character, just like in the first game. These costumes all look pretty cool, and some of them are even based on some of the classic comic versions of the characters. Again, this adds to the game's replay value, just like many of the other features. Interestingly, you also get a trailer for the game Ultimate Spider-Man, which came out the same year. Long-time subscribers of mine might remember that I reviewed that game some time ago, and what's funny about it is that that game actually had a trailer for this game in it. I think what I like most about this game is the fact that it's incredibly story-driven, and has a whole bunch of replay value. One of the criticisms I had for the first game is that it lacked a proper New Game Plus mode, which I really think it needed. A way to replay the game with all your level ups and upgrades that you unlocked from a previous playthrough. Thankfully in this game they actually did add that feature. You can now replay the game and carry over all your level ups and unlocks from a previous save. This is an awesome feature and I really appreciate it. So the game is a solid experience and in many ways it's on par with the first game, and even improves upon it in some areas. Unfortunately though, there is something about this game that holds it back from being better than the first. I think the first game had a much more interesting and complicated story, and I just found the plot to be more engaging. Also, with the way that the first game plays out, with Allison acting as a main protagonist, and you being basically introduced to the whole X-Men world with her, it made the game's story so much more personal, and it was more well written in my opinion. Also, the soundtrack this time isn't quite as good as the first game. It's not bad, in fact it's pretty good, but I would say that the soundtrack of the first game was so much more epic and so much better in my opinion. So as great as this game is, and taking into consideration the improvements that were made, I still personally prefer the first game. Still though, I give X-Men Legends 2 Rise of Apocalypse a solid 9 out of 10. A great game that still holds up today. Sure, the graphics are dated and there have been several games like this over the years, but for me the game's still a great experience and I really enjoyed it. Thanks for watching guys, I really enjoyed replaying and reviewing X-Men Legends 2. Let me know what you guys think. Stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again, I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.